This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
And hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Meetinghouse, where we do have conversation on religion and American life. I am your host, Dwight A. Moody. Glad you've joined us today, live, March the 30th. Or if you're listening to this as a podcast, all of our shows are archived as podcasts on our website at themeetinghouse.net. But however you're listening to it, we welcome you and thank you for your interest and your support. We're coming to you perhaps over radio out of Brunswick, Georgia, and also on YouTube. And we're streaming live on Facebook at themeetinghouse.net at St. Stephen's Baptist Church Live, and also on my Facebook page, Dwight A. Moody. And you can watch any of that live today or later. As always, I have the news, and in a few minutes, I'll have my guest, the Reverend Dr. Nancy Petty from the Pullen Memorial Baptist Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. We're going to be talking about liberal or progressive Christianity in America. For most of my life and ministry, certainly, white evangelical Christianity has been the dominant form. That and Roman Catholicism have comprised more than half of the American population. And but evangelicalism has been in decline. And that's been widely documented. And surprise, surprise, white liberal Christianity has plateaued from its long decline and may be experiencing a turnaround. We're going to be talking to Nancy about all of that in just a minute. But first, the news, and I'm glad to have with me on the show today my longtime friend, Dr. David Shae, a businessman and now an educator for many years and still a teacher of homiletics, that's preaching, at the Athenaeum in Cincinnati, which means he teaches Catholic students, both priests and deacons, how to preach or to preach better. Welcome to the Meetinghouse, David.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Dwight. It was a pleasure to collaborate with you. We've done some wonderful things in the past, and glad to be with you today.
Thank you so much. I have been, of course, on your campus many times and worked with your students, and that's always been a joy to me. And it's great to have you here as we talk about the news. The news is brought to you by Perfecto Coffee, our sponsors out in California. Many of you know the story of these two young people. They were my students at Georgetown College, went out to California and started their coffee company, and I send a bag of their coffee to every one of my guests. So Nancy and David, you're going to get a bag of this coffee. It may take a few weeks, but it will arrive. I hope you're both coffee drinkers. If not, pass it along to somebody.
Yeah, I love coffee.
Great. And anybody can order their coffee at perfectocoffeeinc.com. It's a wonderful story. They started their business right as the pandemic was launching and discovered that their coffee truck, very much like a food truck, was suddenly in demand everywhere. As you can understand that restaurants were closed and people were putting in for food trucks and coffee trucks. And so they managed to survive the pandemic. So they are our sponsors, and I have 5 news stories today, beginning in Los Angeles. The animated motion picture entitled American Sikh is set to chronicle the life and times of Vaishnav Singh. He is known in popular culture as the creator of the cartoon called Sikh Captain America, the hero with turban on his head, fighting prejudice, bigotry, and intolerance. The movie traces his life from his time in India, where his family survived the anti-Sikh bloodshed of 1984, to his move back to the United States, where he rediscovered his Sikh identity. It was tested again in the aftermath of 9/11. Many of you know that those who had connections to the Middle East were often objects of scorn, ridicule, and violence in the anger after 9/11. The movie about his life and about Sikh Captain America will premiere at the Sikh Art and Film Festival November 18 to 21. David, are you familiar with this cartoon character?
No, I'm not, but I have to tell you that thanks to, in good part, to my two grandsons, Aiden and Liam, I'm a very big superhero fan. We've watched all of the Marvel movies, and my favorite is Captain America. So I think I can identify with this individual's orientation and with his the banner he waves and the causes that he pursues.
I don't think I know personally any Sikhs. Do you have any Sikhs in your network of colleagues and friends?
I do not. I have to admit that that is one segment that I have not had any experience with. We have a number of Indian people in our parish community. They're wonderful people, usually very, very well educated, very generous, giving people, hardworking. But I cannot say that I know anyone who is Sikh.
I'm the same way. I have met them from time to time, and I've always been impressed with them, even as you described. And we hope this movie has a good reception. From Tallahassee, Florida, Dale Risanella, a lay minister in the Roman Catholic Church, is set to receive the first ever Guardian of Life Award during a special convocation at the Pontifical Academy for Life in Rome. Resanella has been serving for decades as a correctional chaplain for inmates on death row and in solitary confinement on behalf of the Catholic bishops of Florida. He goes from cell to cell to offer pastoral care, religious education, and spiritual accompaniment, especially as they go into the death chamber. Quote, "These are men and women who cannot come out," he said. "They can't even come to the chapel, so the church must go to them," end quote. Now almost 70 years old, Resanella spent more than 20 years as a successful corporate and finance lawyer before beginning his ministry. He's retiring. His replacement is a young man, a former NFL athlete. Well, this is in your network, David. I had the first question I had about this when I read it: can a man like this serve the Eucharist?
He can, as an extraordinary minister of the Eucharist. Remember, we talked about that.
Yes, we did.
One past conversation. If the Eucharist is already confected, consecrated, then he can certainly bring the Eucharist to these inmates as an extraordinary minister of the Eucharist.
Yeah.
But a priest would be required in order to preside at the celebration of the Eucharist and consecration.
So he would pick up the elements at
Yes.
a local Catholic
Local
sanctuary.
church, chapel, exactly. And I'm sure he has an arrangement with a local Catholic church. He stops there on his way to
Sure.
the prison, and that's perhaps part of his daily routine.
And of course, only some of his parishioners, if we can call them that, would be Roman Catholic, and he would be in a place where he's ministering to the widest assortment of people.
I had a classmate at Aquinas, Dwight, a Catholic priest. He was actually from the Philippines. He was physically imposing, but he had a wonderful heart. And he was a chaplain at a maximum security prison in San Francisco, and that was his full-time ministry. And he told some incredible stories about the environment of that facility and how, just to survive, that the inmates create this environment that is so different from what we can relate to as people who are on the outside of these facilities. I also have some priest friends here in Cincinnati who regularly minister at prisons. They go in there on weekends, they say mass, they bring inmates the Eucharist, they hear confessions. In fact, there's a couple of priests who who are actually catechizing and evangelizing
Yeah.
the inmates. And our own Archbishop Dennis Schnurr, has gone into the prison to baptize inmates and also to confirm them. So the Catholic Church here in Cincinnati does, I think, a good job of ministering to inmates in prisons, people that would otherwise be forgotten altogether.
Well, you know, David, as you perhaps know, I have a real interest in this. My own son spent 8 years in maximum security federal prisons. And so, unfortunately, you know, I have heard lots of stories about life in maximum security prisons around the country, including stories about the counselors and clergy. So I honor people who
Yes.
do this, and of course I'm concerned about the high rate of incarceration in the United States. That really troubles me. But so I honor this man, and I'm glad he's being honored over in Rome.
Yeah, that is a great honor.
It is.
And thanks to him for his ministry and his devotion and dedication. That is absolutely remarkable.
It is.
We are in debt to him.
From Nashville, Tennessee, the Executive Committee of the Southern Baptist Convention met again, this time by Zoom. You'll remember I reported on this last week. Once again, they refused to provide full cooperation to the task force empowered by the Southern Baptist Convention to investigate sexual abuse in the denomination and how it was handled by the Executive Committee. A motion for the Executive Committee to waive executive privilege was defeated. This has been the sticking point. This prevents the task force from gaining access to all the documents housed at the Executive Committee. Rebuffed twice now, the task force will now proceed with its investigation without the cooperation of the Executive Committee. The outside research firm called Guidepost Solutions will collaborate with the task force in the work assigned to the task force by the Southern Baptist Convention. I reported on this last week. I went to the Southern Baptist Convention for the first time in 30 years this year and was there on the floor reporting when there was this minor rebellion from the floor demanding that the convention appoint an independent task force to investigate all of this. And the Executive Committee resisted it then, is resisting it now, and it's causing a major problem for Southern Baptist. I know, you know, Roman Catholics have been dealing with this sexual abuse stuff for a long time, David. And it's been swept under the rug among Southern Baptists and just now coming out. But it's a real problem in a lot of religion networks.
Yeah, unfortunately, there is some real sordid history on this issue. And I was thinking about this when you sent me the news last night. I have many friends who are priests, Catholic priests, and every time there is a disclosure, every time something happens or it's made public, all of the priests I know who are close friends of mine, they suffer terribly when this happens because they all feel like the Catholic priesthood in total is being indicted by these. And yet, it involves a handful of priests, not to diminish the scope of the evil here. But the situation that you're reporting on, it kind of resonates with the fact that not only is the perpetration of the sexual abuse a terrible evil, but the systematic actions on the part of church hierarchy, bishops and archbishops and cardinals, is just as evil and just as horrible. The systematic, suppression of the truth, the reassignment of priests who have known problems. That's part of the very ugly history in the Catholic Church on sexual abuse. So I think anything that stands in the way of investigating and getting at the truth and getting at the facts, I think is absolutely wrong.
And of course, this is kind of institutional self-survival. mechanisms that are common in corporations and in schools and in churches. And it's wrong everywhere. We're watching it on the Olympics over the last several years. And the woman who triggered all of that gymnastics sexual abuse with the Olympics was herself a Southern Baptist woman from Texas and now a lawyer. So this has been in systems all over the country, and it's ugly, and it does indict all of it. And it has to play a role, don't you think, David, in the demise of the decline in church attendance? And
yeah, I think it absolutely a factor.
Yeah.
In my experience of dealing with young people in particular, it's a couples
In
preparing
particular.
for marriage in the
Yeah.
Catholic Church. One of the things that couples gravitate to or hold on to are these reasons for not being active in their Catholic faith.
Right.
So
Right.
regardless of how strongly they may feel about something or against something, it is one more thing
Yeah.
that these couples hold on to validate their decision not to be active in the practice of their faith.
And the same thing in the Protestant world, David. From Dallas, Josh McDowell, an internationally known Christian speaker and writer, has announced he's taking a break from his ministry due to the backlash from a speech he recently gave at the annual meeting of the American Association of Christian Counselors in Orlando, Florida. In that speech, entitled "The 5 Greatest Global Epidemics," he identified a series of threats that McDowell claims face the Christian church, including critical race theory, or CRT. His speech is part of a broad pushback from religious and political conservatives against CRT, and in many cases, against racial justice, period. After news of the speech went public, McDowell issued an apology for this part of the speech. No recording or copy of the speech has been made public. McDowell is 82 years old. Are you familiar with Josh McDowell, David?
I'm not.
It's a very prominent name in evangelical and Protestant circles, kind of traveled around the country as an apologist, speaking on campuses and in churches. And here he came out with this broad attack against critical race theory, which of course most people hear as an attack against racial justice in general, because critical race theory teaches that racism is systematic and not just
right.
individual, and this a lot of conservatives don't like. I don't know what's going to happen to him, but at 82 he could retire, don't you think, David?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know what a good retirement age is anymore, Dwight.
How old are you, David?
I'm 74. I turned 74 in August, and I am just as busy as I was when I retired, quote, in at the age of 70.
Yeah.
And I was talking with a friend of mine who says, "Hey, listen, staying active and staying engaged is probably helping to keep you young." And I said, "Well, I certainly hope so. It's certainly contributing to my fatigue."
Well, I'm 71 and I'm as busy and active as I've ever been, and I love it. From Washington, D.C., the Public Religion Research Institute, led by best-selling author Robert P. Jones, has issued a report that explores the relationship between religious identity and vaccination rates at the local county level. Their chief findings are: counties with greater shares of white evangelical Protestants have lower rates of vaccination, while counties with greater shares of either white Catholics, religiously unaffiliated, or religious diversity have higher rates of vaccination. The study combines county-level religion estimates from PRRI's 2020 Census of American Religion with county-level COVID-19 vaccination data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as other sources. I don't think this surprises any of us, does it, Dave?
No, I think it's interesting. I'd never thought of that, candidly, but I'm sure there's a study that about any particular aspect of this this whole COVID vaccination issue is so divisive in our country right now. My own situation back in the March 2020 timeframe when everything was shut down, at least in the state of Ohio here. My wife and I, because of our age, were confined to our home, and our kids and friends were shopping for us. We never walked out of the house,
Yeah.
And even our pastor at our church, we were streaming daily masses with an empty church. And he said, Dave, because of your wife's health, you're going to stay home. And so I figured in that time frame, I felt pretty useless and not like I was making a contribution. So I had an opportunity, and I decided to volunteer for phase 1 of the Pfizer vaccine trial. This was the first human trial of that vaccine in the spring of 2020. And everybody, I have to tell you, everybody in my life, everybody who knows me, friends and family alike, everybody thought I was crazy, taking great risk. But I studied, the 11-page document they had me read. And so I received my inoculation in June of 2020, the first dose, and then the second. But the point is that having gone through that experience at Cincinnati Children's Hospital in what's called the Gamble program, funded by one of the families of the Procter and Gamble Corporation going back many years, it was a very positive experience. I was well cared for. I was well treated. I never felt unsafe. They took very good care of me, and they continued to track me with blood draws. And I've already received a booster. I received a booster back in the March timeframe. So because of this, I become a real strong advocate of being vaccinated. And
you're the poster child for vaccination in Ohio and the Catholic Church. Good for you.
Yeah, I wrote an article and published it on Facebook. I have a big following, and it was taken and re-forwarded by many hundreds of people. So I tried to do my part to encourage people to get vaccinated based upon my very positive experience. But in my experience of dealing with people in the Catholic Church, because I went back to do masses as a deacon in our church on July 1st of 2020, and I haven't stopped since. So over that time frame, I have come in contact with thousands and thousands of people. And Catholics who wear face masks to go to church, they come forward to receive the Eucharist. It has all been a positive experience for me. So the thing that I struggle with is this issue of we versus they, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, the mask wearers and those who refuse to. I don't understand the divisiveness of this issue in our country. I remember as a youngster, and you might too, is when we were back in the days of polio, and as school children in grade school, we all lined up to receive the polio vaccine, in fact, twice. And there was never this kind of argument. It was never contested. Nobody dared challenge. Every single individual, every single child got the vaccine because nobody wanted to get polio. So this is a tough issue. And not surprisingly, I think that you've got the we versus they, even in religion,
Yes, we've got it in our church. It's very common, especially across the white evangelical world. But I've got my shots. I'm waiting for my booster, and I'm going to be first in line when my 6 month comes around. David, thank you for being with us in the Meeting House and talking about these news stories.
Yeah, I wish we had more time. Dwight, maybe we can do this again.
We'll do it again. This is the Meeting House, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I'll be back in just a minute with the Reverend Dr. Nancy Petty. The news is brought to you by PerfectoCoffeeInc.com. Go there and order some. I'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the Meeting House. I want to welcome for the first time to the Meeting House Reverend Nancy Petty. For almost 20 years now, she's been the senior pastor of Pullen Memorial Baptist Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. She's received a string of awards and recognitions from organizations in and around Raleigh, recognizing her leadership in the community and state. She's a powerful and influential voice for the full range of progressive issues, including LGBTQ inclusion, racial justice, and earth care. Nancy, welcome to the Meeting House.
Thank you, Dwight. It's great to be with you.
I read the bio on you and learned that you have a King Charles Spaniel and you love the mountains. So, I think because of these things, we could be real friends.
I think so. I also read where you like the Pittsburgh Steelers, John Prine, Kentucky Wildcats, and Jesus. And I thought we could trade a couple of those and go with the Carolina Panthers, Dolly Parton, and the NC State Wolfpack.
You're pushing your limits there, Nancy, I'm afraid. But we're together on Jesus, aren't we?
We're together on Jesus.
You have been, for most of our ministries here in America, Christianity in America has been dominated by the white evangelical movement. Mm-hmm. That's much less true now. Mm-hmm. You in your church, you've been on the staff there for 30 years, pastor for almost 20. Mm-hmm. You have from the very beginning offered an alternative to that way of being a Christian. So how has this been for you?
Yes, a great question. At times, Dwight, it's been isolating. It's been hard, a struggle, times very painful and risky. Mm-hmm. And yet at other times it's been exhilarating, joyful, motivating and hopeful, fun. And I think always meaningful through all of the struggle of trying to live a different narrative with our faith than what has been in the white evangelical mainstream. It's been a gift and it's been meaningful, even in the struggle. And there have been wonderful moments of the Spirit moving and joining in that. But it's always been meaningful to try to offer up a different narrative to our faith and story.
Were you raised in a liberal Protestant environment?
I was raised Southern Baptist in the western part of North Carolina. My little Baptist church that I grew up in, Sandy Plains Baptist Church, was a conservative Southern Baptist church. It was not fundamentalist. We always had pastors who had been to seminary. And so I feel like, I was lucky in that regard, in that I walked away from that experience with some theology that obviously I've had to rethink and reform, but it wasn't abusive, I don't think.
Yes, it's very similar to my experience as well. Mm-hmm. Growing up in a very conservative Southern Baptist churches, just like you in Kentucky. So how did you get where you are today? Who influenced you? Where did your journey take you?
Wow. So how did I get here? A lot of life experience of, so when I graduated high school, I went to a Baptist college, Gardner Webb.
Mm-hmm. Not far from where I am right now.
Right there in my hometown where I grew up. Mm-hmm. I had some amazing professors mm-hmm. there, and I majored in religion, and had some Bob Lamb, Alice Cullinan. These were important people in my life. Of course, my father, who has a deep faith, he was the one in my early childhood and youth that I paid attention to and followed his example. But But these professors, when I got into college, really began shaping my mind and my ability to ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
which may not have been as encouraged in that small Southern Baptist church I grew up in, but by the time I got to college, really encouraged free thinking, asking the questions. And then in seminary is when things really, the light bulb became brighter and turned on. And there's just too many people to mention in terms of those who influenced me and were my mentors: Alan Neely, Elizabeth Barnes, Sam Ballantyne. I mean, it's just, the list
Mm-hmm.
is so long. Incredible teachers who were not afraid for their students to really ask the hard questions, to try and really dig into our faith story and understand its relevance for us today. And that shaped me. People that I have read, Brueggemann has been a huge influence in my life. Carter Haywood is a mentor and a huge influence in my life. So I've been lucky just to have these people that are not just people who are writing books, but people who I've had the privilege to interact with,
Mm-hmm.
who
Mm-hmm.
have really encouraged me to come to my own authentic faith narrative.
Right.
Yeah.
And now you've been at the helm of a community of faith. You've been an influential leader. We've watched, I know you've watched as researchers like Robert P. Jones, who was in the Meetinghouse about a year ago with me. Recent data shows that the evangelical world is shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
The progressive Christian world, which has been shrinking for a long time, has at least stabilized, they say,
Mm-hmm.
and has really picked up number-wise over the last couple of years. How do you account for this? What's going on to make this happen?
So I think over the last several years, particularly the last 4 years, and even before that, I think people are tired of this fake news culture that we're living in. I think people who want to live really purposeful, meaningful lives, they're looking for an authentic faith. They're looking for a faith that can face the hard questions in life, and that is looking for a moral agenda that is not about beating people up, but about lifting people up. I think there's a shift in this.
I'm going to write that down. As a preacher, that sounds pretty good to me.
No,
Beating people up.
Yeah, I really think the whole white evangelism has focused so on sin and how, awful we are as human beings, and that religion being used to control.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are at a whole different place in how they want to live in the world right now. And so this progressive, more liberal message of radical welcome, of inclusion, of diversity, of compassion over belief, I think those things are resonating with people and feel very relevant to people.
As you talk, I can't help but think about the Taliban in Afghanistan, because they're coming in and reestablishing all of these limitations and controls and restrictions and rules and judgments. And, sometimes I think about what has happened in America in certain groups as a kind of a Talibanish version of religion, a version of Christianity.
Right.
There's a meanness to it.
Yep. There is.
And so we have survived the rise of Trumpism, and we hope we're going to survive, as we were talking about a minute ago with David, this pandemic. And so Trumpism and the pandemic, this has dominated the last 5 years in America.
Mhm.
It's dominated life in North Carolina.
Mhm.
It's dominated life everywhere.
Yeah.
Have you survived? How have you fared spiritually and vocationally and personally?
Yeah, it's been hard.
It has
It's
that.
been hard. When David was talking about, ministers being in their sanctuaries preaching to an empty church, nobody in the pews. The first several weeks there was some kind of like excitement in that, but after about week 2, it's like, no, I'm done with this, and I want my people back in the pews, and now it's been 2 years. The Trumpism thing, I was thinking about that when you spoke about it. To me, we can't ignore the danger of it, and yet it is such a diversion. And I don't know if you're familiar with this Thomas Pynchon quote that I used in a sermon recently, that goes something like, if you can get them asking the wrong questions, then you don't have to worry about the answers.
Yeah.
And that is Trumpism. If you can get the people asking the wrong questions and fighting over the issues that are insignificant, that are not really the issues, then you don't have to worry about coming up with solutions that are moral, that promote equality and justice. You can just divert everything. And that's what I think Trumpism has done. Of course, this pandemic has changed our lives forever. We will move forward from this time with a new understanding of life and relationship and faith and church. And I tell my congregation all the time, people started writing about how this pandemic was going to shape the church in the coming months and years. And 3 months in, people were writing essays on this, and I'm like, I'm still trying to figure out what it all means. I think it's going to take us. I think it's going to take us years to unpack what our new reality will be coming out of this, but we will engage differently. I do know that.
Well, there are a lot of us who think there will never be a coming out of it, so to speak, that the virus is here to stay. I'm the visiting preacher at a little church over here in Hendersonville, and we're talking about this. There was this feeling initially that, we'll survive this, and then the pandemic will be over. We'll get back to normal.
Yeah.
But, maybe the virus is going to be like the flu, and it's just going to stay with us, and we're going to have to cope with things on an ongoing basis.
I think that's right. And I think where we are going to have to push our faithful in terms of those who have been a part of the church is that we have to be safe. There's no question about that. And, I get the comfort of attending church at home in your pajamas, but that's not what kind of relationship we're called to build and be in with one another. And so at some point, we're going to have to figure out how we get back to being together and being in relationship in person. And that's not to knock at all social media. I've been so grateful for social media and technology and all the ways people can connect. I mean, it saved us through this pandemic. But as we're being called to be the faithful in the world and to be God's people, there's a level of relationship building that has to happen when we are in the presence of one another.
I'll have to say what I miss most is just congregational singing,
Mm-hmm.
standing up and joining voices and singing a great hymn or even singing a lament. In either way, just letting what's in our souls pour out in a great congregational song. I think I miss that as much as any single thing.
Yeah.
Other people, miss the Eucharist and or they miss the right hand of fellowship, and I certainly miss both of those. But I think it's the singing I miss the most. Let me ask you what you are reading.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have about 4 or 5 books on my desk right now that I'm reading, and one of them is Robert Jones's "White Too Long." I think I think every pastor,
yes,
and every churchgoer, every person who calls themselves a Christian should read that book.
I do too. It was a pivotal book.
Yes.
I read it last summer.
Yep.
When it came out, we had Robert on. We talked about it. It's won all kinds of awards. I agree with you. It's even more powerful than his book. What is it? Christian America, the decline of white Christian America.
Right. Yeah. I think that's it.
But I agree with you. That book needs to be read and studied in churches everywhere.
It does.
It's my story.
It's that important to the church. What I understand the church's mission to be right now in this time and in this day. I'm rereading because it too was such an eye-opening book for me years ago. I'm rereading Crossan's book, God and Empire.
Right.
Because I think that this understanding of how Jesus's whole ministry was standing up to and exposing and fighting, if you will, the powers, the systems that have people marginalized and oppressed, and that's no different today than it was in Jesus's day. And so I think I want to always keep that narrative in my mind and in my soul and in my work. And so I'm rereading that again. And you always have to throw some poetry in. So I keep a Mary Oliver book of her devotions on my desk and go through those. But I do want to mention one other book that I think people should check out. Are you familiar with John Pavlovich?
Yes, of course.
His new book just came out.
Yeah,
it's called "Don't Be a Jerk: Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans." John just gave me a copy of it, and I started reading it, and it's good. It's a fun, not just fun, but it has some very deep wisdom and insight in it, and so I commend that book to people as well.
I think he has just announced an illness.
He is in surgery right now.
Oh,
as we are
today.
on this show. He has a tumor on his pituitary gland, and they are removing that tumor today.
Good. I don't know him personally. I'd like to get him in the Meetinghouse to talk about this stuff, but I did see where you posted that. I have friends who send me all of his articles, and on Pathos, I think, where a lot of his writing is. That's great. Now, you are the chair of the board, I think, still maybe, of the Repairers of the Breach, an organization. Past chair.
I finally, after 5 years of chairing the board, told them this year they had to get a new chair, and so I'm the immediate past chair. I'm still on the board, but I'm not chairing this year.
Tell us about this organization.
Yeah, so Repairs of the Breach is basically Reverend William Barber's nonprofit organization that is seeking to build, really, Dwight, a moral agenda that's rooted in a framework that like I was trying to say earlier, that uplifts our deepest moral and constitutional convictions, that that lifts up all people in our nation. And so we are looking as an organization. If you listen to Reverend Barber when he spoke at the Democratic conventions years
we
back,
all remember it. Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
It's that redeeming the heart and soul of America with a moral agenda. So what Repairs is trying to do is what progressives in some sense are trying to do, liberals, and that is to lift up a different narrative, to lift up a moral narrative that says that the only narrative is not this narrative of economic injustice, that of the war machine, of denying climate, that climate's not real, climate change is not real. This kind of we are nonpartisan. Reverend Barber likes to say we have no permanent friends or permanent enemies, and we don't. But there is this kind of white evangelical fundamentalist narrative that has been the kind of narrative that has been lifted up for a number of years, and so there's another narrative that needs to be lifted up, put within a moral framework that says there is a different way for us to be in relationship with human beings in this and other creatures in this country that isn't based on a hierarchy of someone being at the bottom and a few being at the top. And so our goal really as an organization is to really lift up these themes of poverty. There should be no poverty in the United States, and there is a way. When you spend $2 trillion on war since 9/11, but yet you say, how are we going to fund economic equality in this? That's the wrong question. I mean, that's the wrong. We can have economic equality in this nation. And so how do you begin to talk about that? And that's what Repairs of the Breach is trying to do on a national level, to engage people in a conversation that offers a different narrative for us to follow.
I'll have to say, and I think I speak for a lot of people, as we watched the departure from Afghanistan, you alluded to it there with that 20 years, $2 trillion, and how quickly everything we were trying to do as an American culture, a political force, military force, how quickly it dissolved back into the tribalism of the Taliban. And it's like, what, $2 trillion, thousands of lives, 20 years, and this is what we have to show for it?
Exactly.
And we're willing to do that. And here we are today, as you and I are talking today. They're arguing in Washington, D.C. about whether $2 trillion is too much money to spend, as you just say, on poverty, on equality, on education, on the care of children, on building bridges, all these types of things.
That's right.
There's a great disconnect between the futility. It's not totally futile, because I think 20 years we helped many people over there, but evidently very little permanent help.
And let's link that back to your question about why is progressive Christianity maybe making some gain right now. I think progressive Christianity really, the voice became heard through the immigration through the immigration issue here, when people of faith who really care about understanding and following Jesus, and a faith that calls us to love one another and to help our neighbor, to love our neighbor. When Christians started seeing people, children, mothers, fathers,
Yeah.
drowning in the Rio Grande, those images began to shift the narrative and the consciousness, the moral consciousness of Christians in this country.
A powerful word there, Nancy. I think I hadn't thought of it with quite the clarity that you just declared it, but I think you're right about this. And even just a couple of weeks ago, watching the folks, what organization is it, had just announced that there were 10.9 million job openings in the United States. 10.9 million.
Yep.
And then you've got these thousands of people who are waiting on the board. They want to come in and go to work.
Yeah.
My feeling is, let's let them in, give them a green card, teach them English, and
let them work.
Let them work.
Yeah.
Let them work. Yeah.
Well, we know our history. Immigrants have built this country. Our success has been built on the backs of immigrants. I also think another obvious turning point, and I don't know where we're going to go with this. I don't know where our country will eventually, how much we're willing to repent and make change. But another real moment for Christians who are really searching, who want to have a deep faith, when they watched a white man kill a black man with his knee, and watch that over and over and over again. If you have any conscience,
right,
that awakens something in you, in your soul, that says God expects something more of us.
Yeah.
A lot more of us. And I think, whereas sometimes I still think Christians have a hard time voicing it or are unwilling to put words to it, we know in our hearts what we've been taught about what Jesus teaches us in terms of loving one another.
Right.
And we see those images and we know we're doing wrong. And I think that has awakened progressives in this country to say, we're not just going to keep accepting this narrative of, keeping us stuck in sin and judgment and this kind of abusive theology that just constantly beats us down. But there's more to our faith than that.
Nancy, last year, as the virus was sweeping over the world and the country, we had these 3 murders. Of course, one in Brunswick, Georgia, Ahmaud Arbery, one in Louisville, Kentucky. And my guest next week is Dr. Kevin Cosby. Do you know Kevin Cosby?
I don't.
Well, he is the moral leader of the Christian community in Kentucky. And then, of course, the one in Minneapolis. But my house is in Glenn County, Georgia. And so I was involved in the public response and protest and rallies after the Ahmaud Arbery murder happened. And of course, we all know the drama of what happened there. And of course, now they've arrested not only the 3 men, but also the district attorney. The trial of the 3 men begins at the end of October.
Yeah.
Where 3 white men are going to go on trial for murdering a black man. And I've said to many people, the likelihood of them getting a conviction, is, when was the last time 3 white men got convicted of murdering a black person in Georgia? And then 10 days ago in the mail, my wife gets a letter from the local judge saying you've been selected to serve on the jury for the Ahmaud Arbery trial.
Wow.
And so here we are, getting ready. Whether or not she'll be selected for the actual jury or not, I don't know. But once again, it's bringing it home to us as a family. And of course, next week, Kevin Cosby is my guest. We're going to be talking about the Breonna Taylor situation and everything related to racial justice in Louisville. And I'll have to say that my guest, the day after the George Floyd murder, my guest in the Meetinghouse was a minister of music in Minneapolis. And we talked about how they had to switch overnight their worship plans in order to respond as a praying community in what was at one time the largest Lutheran church in America. How they had to respond to the murder in Minneapolis, and of course that's been going on now for a year or more. I agree with you that those three murders shook us all up. And unleashed things, didn't they?
That did.
It unleashed a lot of courage in some preachers.
Yeah.
And it brought about the conversion of a lot of ordinary people, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I do.
It has been great, Nancy, to have you in the Meetinghouse today.
Been my pleasure.
We've had a very similar social and spiritual journeys. And here we are near the end of our public ministries, finally meeting one another.
Yes. Yes.
And I hope our paths cross face to face at sometime soon. God bless you, Nancy Petty, for coming to the Meetinghouse. Bless your ministry. Keep marching at the head of that parade. I'm right there with you.
We'll do it.
All right. I'll be back in just a minute to close out the show here in the Meetinghouse. Thank you for joining us today in the Meetinghouse. I've been your host, Dwight A. Moody. My two guests, David Shae up in Cincinnati, Nancy Petty over in Raleigh, talking about things that are important to you and to me and to the whole American community. I ran out of time to read my commentary. There is a bomb in Gilead. You can read it at themeetinghouse.net with all the other commentaries. I've written about things including John Prine and including my dad, Tom Moody. I'm doing a series about him growing up in Owensboro, Kentucky. That's at themeetinghouse.net, and you can log on to any of our podcasts. There must be 100 podcasts on that webpage now. You can subscribe to my weekly newsletter, distributed every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. I was 27 minutes late last night. I think that's the first time I've been late. But normally 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You can become a donor and join what we call the Circle of 70. 70 people. I selected 70 because we launched this last year when I turned 70 myself. We need your help, and we thank you for your support and for your interest in this broadcast. I want to give a shout out to my radio engineer in Brunswick, Georgia, Everett Armstrong. Greetings to you, and to the video editor and engineer, Alex Mattingly in Louisville, Kentucky. You can follow me on Twitter at Dwight A. Moody. Until next week, when my guest will be Tom Crottenmaker. Some of you read his stuff. He's the religion and values writer for the USA Today newspaper. He's been on the show several times. And also the Reverend Kevin Cosby of the great St. Stephen's Baptist Church, on whose television and streaming network we are going out to you today. Until then, do justice, love mercy, wash your hands, get that booster shot, order some coffee, perfectocoffeeinc.com. Send a donation to the Meeting House. Be kind to everyone. Pray for the soul of America. I'm Dwight Moody in the Meeting House. God bless you. Have a great day.
You have been in the Meeting House with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news, reviews, commentaries, and conversation on religion and American life.